Here is what we know as of tonight, Monday, March 9th, 2026. Iran has a new supreme leader. His name is Mojtaba Khamenei. He is 56 years old. He is the son of the man the United States and Israel killed 9 days ago. And Donald Trump has already told the world that this new leader is, in his words, unacceptable. That before the clerics in Tehran even finished counting their votes, the President of the United States said this man would not last long without American approval. That was not a casual remark. That was a warning. And understanding exactly what that warning means, what it costs, who it threatens, and where it leaves 73 million Iranians and 330 million Americans. That is what the next 25 minutes are about. Let's go back to the beginning. Not 9 days ago. Not last week. Farther. For months leading into 2026, the signals were there for anyone paying close attention. In January of this year, protests erupted across Iranian cities. Iranians took to the streets again, angry about a collapsing currency, runaway inflation, the rial had lost staggering value in the years prior, and the death of a 26-year-old protester that the regime had scheduled for execution. These were not small demonstrations. Iranian officials reported at least 7 dead in the early days of violence surrounding those protests. They were, by most accounts, the largest street demonstrations in Iran since 2022, when Mahsa Amini was killed in police custody. And Trump watched. On January 2nd, he posted to Truth Social that if Iran violently kills peaceful protesters, the United States would come to their rescue. He wrote, and this is a direct quote, "We are locked and loaded and ready to go." Then, in the days that followed, as Iranian security forces cracked down harder, Trump told the Iranian people to, quote, "take over your institutions." He added, in all capital letters, "Help is on ITS way." That was January. Through February, the United States began quietly but unmistakably building up military assets in the Persian Gulf. There were diplomatic talks happening in parallel. Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff was involved, and so reportedly was Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law. Iran and the United States were, publicly at least, still talking. Negotiations focused on one central demand from Washington. Iran had to stop enriching uranium. Tehran refused. What happened next on the morning of February 28th would change the Middle East permanently. At sunrise in Tehran on Saturday, February 28th, the explosions began. American and Israeli forces launched coordinated strikes across Iran in what the Pentagon named Operation Epic Fury. Early videos from Tehran showed massive plumes of dark smoke rising over the capital. Iran's foreign ministry called the attacks a gross violation of national sovereignty, stating that both military and civilian targets had been hit. The Iranian Red Crescent said more than 200 people were killed in those first hours. But the strike that would reshape everything came when an Israeli missile found Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the 86-year-old supreme leader who had ruled Iran for 35 years above ground. He had not retreated to his bunker. According to reporting from Fox News' chief foreign correspondent, who cited a senior Israeli official, Trump's public messaging in the days before the attack had been part of a deliberate deception campaign. On February 27th, the day before the strikes, Trump posted to Truth Social dozens of times, none of it about Iran. He talked about his State of the Union reviews, about TikTok, about endorsements. The strategy, the Israeli official said, was to keep Khamenei thinking no attack was imminent. And it worked. When the missiles hit, Khamenei was still above ground. He was killed in the opening hours of Operation Epic Fury. Trump confirmed it on Truth Social. He wrote that Khamenei was unable to avoid our intelligence and highly sophisticated tracking systems. Hours later, as Iran threatened massive retaliation, Trump posted again, "They better not do that, however, because if they do, we will hit them with a force that has never been seen before." These were not tweets from a man who had made a reactive, panicked decision. These were the words of a president who had been planning this for weeks, who had helped orchestrate a deception campaign to make it possible, and who was now managing the information environment around it in real time. The question that immediately followed was, what now? When Ayatollah Ali Khamenei died, He left behind something Iran had not faced in 35 years, an unresolved succession. He had never publicly named a successor. A member of Iran's Assembly of Experts, the 88-member council of Shia clerics responsible under Iranian law for selecting a new supreme leader, confirmed to the Mehr news agency that Khamenei had been previously pressed to name a specific individual, but had declined to do so. That created a vacuum. And vacuums in politics are never just empty space. They get filled fast, and whoever fills them first sets the terms for everything that comes after. The Assembly of Experts convened to choose the next supreme leader of the Islamic Republic. In the interim, a temporary governing council was formed, comprising Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian, Judiciary Chief Gholam Hossein Mohseniajeh, and senior cleric Ayatollah Alireza Arafai. They were holding the country together while the clerics deliberated. Multiple names circulated as possible candidates: Hassan Khomeini, the grandson of the Islamic Republic's founder, considered a moderate, Ayatollah Alireza Arafai himself, and Mojtaba Khamenei, the dead leader's son. For days, the announcement was delayed. Iranian politicians acknowledged to the Mehr news agency there were still some obstacles. One reason became clear on Tuesday, March 3rd, when Israel bombed the building in Qom, Iran's holiest city, that was housing the Assembly of Experts, the very clerical body in the middle of casting its votes. Israel was trying to disrupt the process itself. The message from Jerusalem was explicit and deliberate. Even the act of choosing a new leader was not going to happen on Iran's terms. And yet the clerics persisted. Here is where this story goes to a place that has almost no precedent in modern American history. On Tuesday, March 3rd, reporters asked Trump who he wanted to see lead Iran. He answered, "Most of the people we had in mind are dead." That was not a figure of speech. American and Israeli strikes had killed dozens of senior Iranian officials in the opening days of the operation, including Iran's defense minister, the commander of the Revolutionary Guard Corps, and the secretary of the Iranian Security Council. Then, on Thursday, March 5th, Trump sat down for a phone interview with Axios and laid out his position with extraordinary clarity. He said, and this is a direct quote from that interview, "They are wasting their time. Khamenei's son is a lightweight. I have to be involved in the appointment, like with Delcy in Venezuela." He also told Reuters that same day, "We want to be involved in the process of choosing the person who is going to lead Iran into the future, so we don't have to go back every 5 years and do this again and again." The Venezuela comparison is worth pausing on for a moment. In January 2026, U.S. forces captured Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. In his State of the Union, Trump called Venezuela our new friend and partner and said the U.S. had received more than 80 million barrels of oil since the Maduro operation. That is Trump's template. You remove the government, you influence who replaces it, and you extract tangible benefits. He was trying to apply the same playbook to a country of 73 million people in the heart of the Middle East. He told ABC News, speaking of whatever new leader Iran might choose, "He's going to have to get approval from us. If he doesn't get approval from us, he's not going to last long." He was not being subtle. And the clerics of Iran were listening. On the evening of Sunday, March 8th, 9 days after Operation Epic Fury began, Iranian state media reported that the Assembly of Experts had made its decision. It was announced through IRIB state television and confirmed by the Fars, Tasnim, and ISNA news agencies. Mojtaba Khamenei, the second son of the assassinated supreme leader, had been selected as the third supreme leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran. The exact man Trump had called unacceptable. The exact man Trump had dismissed as a lightweight. The exact man Trump had publicly opposed before the votes were even fully counted. Regional officials cited by Reuters described the selection as a direct and deliberate rebuke to the American president. Iran's clerical leadership had looked at the most powerful military force in the world, a war now in its second week, bombs still falling on their cities, their own council being bombed during the selection process, and chose confrontation over compromise. They chose the hardliner's hardliner, the man described by old U.S. State Department cables released through WikiLeaks as the power behind the robes, a figure with deep ties to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, a man who has opposed any engagement with the West his entire adult life. A hardline Iranian cleric, Ayatollah Haidari al-Qasir, captured the regime's logic in a video statement that spread quickly. He said that the Americans mentioning a name meant that name should be rejected, and that whoever is despised by the enemy is certainly for the benefit of Iran and Islam. That is not just rhetoric. That is the operating principle of a government telling its own people, we will not bend, no matter what they drop on us. Mojtaba Khamenei, at 56, is younger than his father was when he took power. He fought in the Iran-Iraq War. He has spent decades building quiet networks of influence within the Revolutionary Guard, the clergy, and the interconnected business elite that sustains the Islamic Republic financially. He has access to the billions in assets the Khamenei family accumulated over decades. And critically, he lacks the formal religious credentials to lead a regime that claims to speak for God on earth. His father was a recognized religious authority. Mojtaba is not. That matters. That gap may matter more in the coming months than any missile. Now let's be precise about what Trump's warning means in practice, because the language of international politics often sanitizes things that are actually quite brutal. When Trump said the new leader won't last long without American approval, he was not making a diplomatic observation. Israel had already issued a parallel statement. The Israeli Defense Forces warned that any successor to Ali Khamenei would be considered a military target. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz had posted on social media before the appointment, warning that any new leader who threatens Israel or supports terror would be an unequivocal target for elimination, adding, "It does not matter what his name is or the place where he hides." So here is the combined message Mojtaba Khamenei woke up to on the morning of March 9th. The United States calls you unacceptable. The Israeli military has threatened to kill you. Your predecessor's bunker complex has already been destroyed. The IDF released images of those strikes on March 5th. You govern a country where more than 940 people have been killed in 9 days of bombing, including, according to Iranian media reports, more than 160 people in a strike on a girls' school. And the President of the United States says you're going to need his approval to survive in office. Senator Lindsey Graham, usually one of Trump's closest allies on foreign policy, pushed back slightly on Sunday's Meet the Press, saying, "That's not our job, to pick the next Iranian government. It's up to Iran to pick your leader. It's not my job. It's not President Trump's job. We're not going to occupy the country." The Blackwater founder Eric Prince, appearing on Steve Bannon's War Room podcast, added a soldier's caution. "I don't think a regime has ever been changed by air power alone. It's wishful thinking." He told Trump directly, in that same appearance, don't ever contemplate ground troops in Iran. The gap between what Trump is claiming, that America effectively has veto power over Iranian governance, and what even his own allies think is achievable, is large. And that gap is exactly where the danger lives. Step back for a moment from the leadership battle and look at what the actual war looks like on day 9. The United States Central Command confirmed on the same day Mojtaba Khamenei was selected that a 7th American soldier had died since the fighting began. This soldier had been wounded in an Iranian attack on U.S. troops in Saudi Arabia on March 1st. 7 Americans dead in 9 days of what the Trump administration initially framed as a targeted operation against nuclear and missile sites. Iran has not been passive. Its naval forces have effectively halted traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway through which roughly 20% of the world's oil supply normally flows every day. Iranian drone and missile attacks have hit U.S. bases in Qatar, the UAE, and Bahrain. Iran struck what it claimed was a U.S. oil tanker in the northern Persian Gulf. Azerbaijan reported being struck by Iranian drones. The war is no longer contained to Iranian territory. Qatar, which is home to the largest American airbase in the Middle East, Al Udeid, declared force majeure on its gas exports after Iranian drone attacks. Qatar supplies approximately 20% of the world's liquefied natural gas supply. Saudi Arabia's Ras Tanura refinery and crude export terminal, one of the most significant energy infrastructure facilities on the planet, closed due to attacks. LNG prices in Europe surged by as much as 50% in a single day. The State Department reported that nearly 20,000 American citizens had returned to the United States from the broader region since the war began. Thousands more remain stranded. Caroline Glick, an international affairs advisor to Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, told NPR that the operation was ahead of schedule on its stated objectives. She also said there is no timeline for when it ends, and that Israel's stated goal is to create the conditions for Iranians to topple their own regime. That is, again, regime change by another description. The official American position, as stated repeatedly by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, is that the goal is not regime change. It is degrading Iran's missile capabilities, its nuclear program, and its navy. But Trump himself has called for Iranians to take over your government. And he posted to Truth Social, in all capital letters, "There will be no deal with Iran except unconditional surrender." Those two positions, we're not after regime change and unconditional surrender, are not the same thing. And the gap between them is where American strategic credibility either holds or breaks. Now we turn to the part of this story that hits closest for the American family sitting at a kitchen table trying to figure out where the money went. The Iran war has been, from its first day, an energy price shock. U.S. crude oil was trading at approximately $67 a barrel on February 27th, the day before the strikes. By the time this script was written on March 9th, oil had surged past $100 a barrel for the first time since Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. At one point on Sunday, March 8th, U.S. crude briefly hit $110 a barrel. Brent crude, the global benchmark, neared $120 a barrel in early Monday trading before pulling back to around $104. The average national price of a gallon of gasoline was $3.45 on Sunday, according to AAA, up 16% in a single week. One more time, 16% in 1 week. That is not a gradual increase that people absorb without noticing. That is a number people feel immediately, every time they stop at a gas station. It is also a number that flows through the entire economy into truck freight costs, airline fares, heating bills, the price of groceries that needed to travel to get to the shelf. Trump, responding to the surge on Truth Social, called it a very small price to pay for American and world safety. He called anyone who thought differently fools. Goldman Sachs economists told clients this week that inflation, which had been on track to ease to 2% by year's end, could now snap back to 3% if the war drags on. Goldman had been expecting an easing cycle. Instead, the Federal Reserve now faces the worst possible monetary scenario, rising prices caused by an external supply shock, combined with an already slowing jobs market. The February jobs report, released on March 7th, was worse than expected, and economists were already invoking a word that should make every American's stomach tighten: stagflation. Higher prices, slower growth, fewer jobs, all at once. Mark Zandi, one of the most widely cited American economists, noted that every sustained $10 per barrel increase in oil prices costs the average American household close to $450 per year. We are currently looking at an increase of $30 to $40 per barrel above pre-war levels. Do that math. For families who are already stretched by 3 years of elevated prices following the post-COVID inflation wave, this war is not an abstraction. It is money leaving their wallets. The J.P. Morgan Chase analysis released this week warned that the 7 major oil-producing Gulf nations could run out of crude oil storage capacity in less than a month if the Strait of Hormuz remains closed. If that happens, producers are forced to cut production, which drives prices higher again. A feedback loop. Former Federal Reserve Chair Janet Yellen offered a public warning. Depending on the war's impact on oil markets, she said, economic growth will suffer, and the Fed's job of containing inflation becomes much harder. The bond market is already reacting. Mortgage rates, which are closely tied to the 10-year Treasury yield, rose back above 6% last week. That matters for ordinary Americans because it freezes the housing market. People who are hoping to buy their first home, or to downsize, or to refinance, they are being told by the market, wait. And here is where the politics gets sharp. A CNN poll released on March 2nd found that nearly 60% of Americans disapproved of U.S. military action in Iran. A Fox News poll released March 4th found that 61% of voters disapproved of Trump's management of the economy. Those are not numbers that belong to different issues. They belong to the same story. The midterm elections are 8 months away, and every Democrat in a competitive district is already drafting their message. House Democratic Caucus Chair Pete Aguilar, a Democrat from California, put it plainly. He's sending billions of our tax dollars to the Middle East for another war while he's kicking people off of health care and eliminating nutrition programs. Senator Martin Heinrich, the top Democrat on the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee, told CNBC, because there was no plan going in, I think there will be lots of things that are unforeseen consequences of this. He noted, pointedly, that gas prices shot up within a single day of the strikes. Republicans are holding their line for now. Representative Zach Nunn, an Iowa Republican in a district rated as a toss-up by the Cook Political Report, said he is not concerned the war could drown out the affordability message. That's a significant political calculation for a member sitting in a swing district, and it signals that the Republican leadership still believes this ends quickly enough that the economic pain doesn't define the election cycle. But the arithmetic is fragile. Every week the war continues is another week of elevated gas prices. Every week of elevated gas prices is another data point for Democrats to use. And the selection of Mojtaba Khamenei, the exact man Trump said was unacceptable, is not just a foreign policy humiliation. It is proof to skeptical American voters that this operation does not have a clear, achievable endpoint. The DNC Communications Director Rosemary Boglin said, working families are being pushed to the brink as Donald Trump's job market tanks and prices soar. Rather than focus on improving the economy, Trump and J.D. Vance are abandoning Americans and plunging the U.S. into an illegal and reckless foreign war with no end in sight. That is the frame. Illegal, reckless, no end in sight. Watch that language appear in television ads between now and November. Pull back even further. This is not only an American story. Egypt's president declared a state of near emergency, economically. Djibouti's finance minister warned publicly of severe economic consequences for developing countries. Small states that depend on maritime trade through the Persian Gulf and the Red Sea, which is to say, dozens of countries in Africa, South Asia, and Southeast Asia, are being hit by shipping disruptions that have nothing to do with their politics and everything to do with their geography. Europe is watching with alarm on two fronts. The European Union Defense Commissioner warned that the conflict made it even more urgent for Europe to ramp up production of air defense and anti-ballistic missiles. He noted publicly that the United States would not be able to provide enough missiles for Gulf countries, for its own military, and for Ukraine's needs simultaneously. That is a rare moment of European candor about American military capacity, and it says out loud something Washington officials do not like to say. The United States is stretched. China holds the wild card. Beijing has strategic petroleum reserves and has so far stayed publicly neutral, but the disruption of 20% of the world's daily oil supply through the Strait of Hormuz affects Chinese manufacturing, Chinese imports, Chinese economic growth. The longer this continues, the more pressure Beijing faces to insert itself, whether through mediation, through back channels to Tehran, or through the kind of quiet support that complicates the American operation without triggering a direct confrontation. And behind all of that is the question no American official has answered on the record. What is the plan if Mojtaba Khamenei simply refuses to capitulate? The strikes don't break the regime's internal coherence and the Iranian people, who polls suggest are split between hating the government and hating a foreign military that is killing their neighbors, don't rise up the way the operation assumed they would. Eric Prince's words from earlier this week deserve repeating here. I don't think a regime has ever been changed by air power alone. It's wishful thinking. Understanding what comes next requires understanding who this man actually is. Mojtaba Khamenei spent most of his adult life operating in the shadows of his father's power. He was not a public figure in the way politicians typically are. He held no elected office. He gave no major speeches. He was, by design, invisible to outside observers while being deeply embedded in the machinery of the Islamic Republic's security apparatus. The WikiLeaks cables, U.S. State Department cables published in the late 2000s, described him as the power behind the ropes. They called him widely viewed within the regime as a capable and forceful leader and manager. That assessment came from American diplomats who were watching him closely. He was sanctioned by the United States in 2019 during Trump's first term for working to, in the U.S. Treasury's words, advance his father's destabilizing regional ambitions and oppressive domestic objectives. He has been intertwined with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps for decades. The IRGC is not just a military force, it is an economic empire, a political faction, a shadow government within Iran's government. Its commander was killed in the opening strikes of Operation Epic Fury. But the institution itself is intact. And Mojtaba Khamenei's relationship with the IRGC is the central source of whatever power he now holds. His weakness is religious. The supreme leader of Iran is supposed to be a recognized authority in Islamic jurisprudence, a scholar whose religious credentials give him legitimacy to be the guardian jurist, the Vilayati Faqih, that Ayatollah Khomeini theorized in 1979 when he constructed the architecture of the Islamic Republic. Mojtaba,